Our listeners are also interested in becoming more equipped to negotiate compensation. Many of them will take up their first jobs or second or the third job. Specifically for AI hires, I see very hazy benchmarks. I told you before, my husband is in AI as well. So he asked me this question multiple times. Some new engineers are receiving $1 million in compensation. So, how should our listeners really think about their compensation as it relates to both fixed components and the equity component, both in public and private companies?
One way I always look at, when you are negotiating compensation,
Yeah.
Information is your superpower.
Mm.
What information do you have about the role, about the company? And, first off, I'll say that for tech roles, includes like AI positions or product management, engineering, design. This is, I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is really, really valuable resource called levels.fyi. Have you
Mm.
heard of that?
I have.
Levels.fyi.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you can find today, you can find everything on it, from entry level salaries and all the way up to at least director. But you can find, for a number of companies, you can find VP compensation there. What I really love about that platform is, and especially it applies often when women change their jobs, they end up getting down leveled in the other companies. Their comp may be same or comp may be higher, but they end up going into a level lower because they just don't have the visibility in terms of, especially if you're going from a tech company to a different sector. Like, how do you know what these levels are? And most of the times companies don't publish their levels, and the levels map that levels.fi shares, they are fabulous and they are accurate in most of the cases. And so now, particularly with AI roles and your question around the compensation there, the thing is, with AI research roles, things are a bit wild right now.
Yeah.
And so what you've heard about these new engineers pulling in this $1 million compensation packages, I have to say, while it's true, it's really not the norm across the board.
Yeah.
It's really not the norm. And these are often these outliers, either at the big tech companies or maybe a startup that got this massive funding, and it's a highly competitive space. And so you'll hear things coming from these two scenarios in most of the cases, and really they're outliers. But I have to say, irrespective, I have to say, like particularly for our listeners, as they are thinking about their compensation and negotiation, of course, stay informed, network with peers. Actually, often your peers, and especially now, at least I know on the East Coast, companies cannot, and I think now it's more of a federal regulation. The companies cannot ask your current salary; they can only ask you what you expect. And I know from my own experience changing jobs, every time a company asks my salary, I always told them. And most women do that. But I learned from my husband and from other men in my family, they never share that their
Wow.
comp. They always say what they expect. And so it's really important, and especially now it's a regulation that people can't ask. And I know I still get asked from time to time, and but I don't say it anymore. I always say, what I expect. And the thing is, compensation negotiation is a skill, and
Yeah.
the more you do it, the better you'll get. But then there's some basics that I like to follow, and always like to look at this whole package, which is literally more than numbers. And so I like to evaluate a package more like in three parts, and each part has an equal weight for me. And it's like, what's the team, the people that you're going to work with? It's so important, the people you'll work with. What's going to be the scope of your role? Because the scope of your role will determine your learning opportunities, will determine how much you'll get stretched in this role, and what new experiences you'll build through this, through taking this job. And the third part is really your total comp. And always say total comp, because if you start comparing your base salary and your bonus and your equity, it is a very, very large world across startup world, early stage companies, or the companies that are smaller in the IPO companies that are smaller, companies that are very mature, and then is a completely different world in the private equity. And so look at your total comp, or at least separate your total comp into your cash comp and your equity. And it's equity is worth very different in different companies, and so you want to make sure that your cash comp will provide for your expenses at a minimum, and don't just leave a company where you have a reasonable cash comp and join a startup with a very small cash comp and largely equity, because it comes with an extensive level of risk. And so knowing what stage of life you're in, knowing what risk you'll be willing to take,
Right.
knowing that it's really more, the people you'll work with is as important as your comp. The scope of your role is as important as your comp. Like having some of these foundations together, I have to say, is super critical. And of course, do your research, know your worth, and most importantly, in a compensation discussion, don't talk too much and be very, very confident.